Hi, how are all of you? Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Black Hat, for accepting this proposal so that we can have this discussion today. So without further ado, yes, we are going to talk about how communities can move forward after instances of sexual assault. And I know in the, is that clicking me or is that clicking you? It's my necklace. Welcome. Okay, so I'm the Wellness Program Director at Cornell University at the College of Veterinary Medicine. And so just as a general heads up, I just want folks to know that we are going to be discussing, of course, issues of sexual harassment, sexual assault, rape, and abuse. And I just want folks to remember to really take care of themselves. These are topics that affect all genders, all orientations, all races. It is not discriminatory. So if you are feeling like maybe some of the subject matter that we talk about, even though we are going to focus more on what to do after incidences like this occur, we're not going to be delving so much into the actual incidences. But I just want folks to remember that, if you need to look at a phone, if you need to kind of, disconnect for a little bit, or if you need to step out, please do so. No one's going to be offended, least of all me, okay? So our goal is by the end of this presentation, you will know how to support and respond to someone who lets you know that they've been sexually assaulted or that they've been harassed, how to respond when someone that you're close to has been accused, and then also some tools to take back to your communities, things that will kind of really get your creative juices going, really thinking about how are you defining your own unique community, whether that's an institution, an organization, whether that's online, whether that's a face-to-face community, social community, that how can your community really creatively and uniquely that fits your group move forward in how to address these issues. So for some basic definitions for everyone, so we're all on the same page, we all have to be defining it the same way for this conversation, right? Sexual harassment, employment decisions that, infect someone's hiring, firing, their promotions, awards, the result of submission or rejection of an unwelcome sexual conduct. And then for this, any activity that creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment for members of one sex, whether that's by a supervisor or by a coworker. And those activities don't have to only occur at work. It could be off-site, it could be on a work trip, it could be something that has occurred outside the office, but is impacting the work environment, okay? When it comes to sexual assault, there is kind of the general sexual assault umbrella that rape tends to fall under, but a lot of people just say sexual assault because it includes generally all non-consensual sexual contact. And so also involving this, a person cannot consent because of age, of course, if they're a minor. Disability, if they have intellectual disabilities, they're not able to consent, or if they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And of course, the list of all these sexual assault, by threatened physical force, coercion, intimidation, and pressure. And I'd also like to be clear, I know that these are a lot of words on these screens, but I just want to let folks know that when they told me that these would be all slides that would be released to all of you at the end of the day, I wanted to make sure that folks who didn't even get to show up would be able to refer to those slides and still know what we were talking about. So I apologize if the slides are a little wordy, but please use them as a reference. Please download them, refer to them. I wanted to make them as easy for you to refer back to, and also easy for someone who maybe didn't show up to be able to kind of glean some information. I want everyone to have this knowledge. And of course, rape being the non-consensual oral, anal, vaginal penetration of a person, of body parts or an object. A lot of folks don't know that it actually doesn't have to just be a body part. It can be an object as well. So this is actually a slide that has been, it's a graph that's used by actually a lot of advocacy groups. And I think this really really well depicts the idea that there's levels, right? There's ways that violence just doesn't occur out of nowhere. Sexual violence never occurs out of nowhere. It is built and sustained on a lot of things. And some of them happen in much younger spaces. So I think if you can, oh, you can't even see that. That's a shame. Okay. So as we see in the victimization section, the idea of boys will be boys, rape jokes, locker room talk. And I want to be really clear to talk about in this section that within that victimization section is also discussion around, be a man, don't cry, pardon my French, but don't be a pussy. When we hear things like that growing up, these are all additional ideas of victimization that we hear of all genders, right? And then it goes up that victimization is entirely built and founded upon creating a power dynamic. It's about creating that so that as we go out further, the degradation, the removal of bodily autonomy, that power continues to widen and widen. And that's what sexual violence is about. It's about power. It's about control. And this all starts at a very early age, and it's, throughout our entire society, right? So common ways that people respond to sexual violence. So if you're a survivor of sexual violence, in that moment, you may experience fight or flight. A lot of people know about that one. Very few know about freeze, that your body may just freeze. And things happen, and you're just like, I just couldn't move. I don't know why I couldn't move. I couldn't say anything, just nothing. I was just so shocked. I just was frozen. It's a very, very common reaction. Fear and anxiety, loss of control, nightmares, anger, trouble concentrating, depression, disrupted relationships. It's very common. Also, increase or decrease in sexual activity. When a survivor of sexual assault, after the trauma that's occurred, there tends to want to be a lot of distance, right? They want distance from the assault. And so sometimes that means a complete decrease of sexual contact. They don't want to go out, they don't want to see anyone, they don't want to go out on dates, they don't want to have maybe sex with their partner. And then there's some folks that distance for them is, I don't want the last time that any of that happened to me to be with that person. So they increase their sexual activity. And that creates the distance that they feel like they need. Very common coping strategies, right? Both achieving distance, both in different ways. And so we also have self-blame that occurs, along with disordered eating habits, other types of self-harm, and then withdrawal from activities. So how do we respond when someone tells us they've been sexually assaulted? So once again, I apologize for the wordiness, but I just really want to make sure that folks have this information. The unconditional support. You listen to them, you tell them that you believe them, you offer resources. Hopefully, I know that Black Hat has a code of conduct, so folks are kind of aware of what the expectation is. But at the same time, realize that there's other resources available in the community. There's resources that, are available digitally, there's resources available in person. And so knowing what is available is also really nice in that moment of, well, I know that there's this and this that you can go to. There's these people who are available to talk to. Also, don't press for details. Just sit there, say that you're happy to listen, and let them tell you what they want to tell you when they are able to tell you. Avoid the whys. There's no point, and sometimes they tend to come across as very blaming, victim blaming. Well, why did you go over? Why did you have drinks with them? All that seems to denote that there was these ways to avoid that you spending time with someone, having a drink with them, which is perfectly normal, that you should have somehow known, oh, that's not normal. And that's not the case, right? And it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't take anything back. Don't tell them what to do. Challenge the statements that they say when they want to blame themselves. Be like, no, it's not your fault. I had one person who they had gotten, they were at a bar, they'd had a little too much to drink, and they decided that instead of driving their car home, they were going to get a taxi, and they were going to get a taxi home. And so they called the taxi, got in the car, and they get to their home, and the taxi driver sexually assaults them in the back of the car. And they spent the next day being, why did I call a taxi? I shouldn't call a taxi. I should have just walked home. Like, why did I do that? And it's like, well, no, you were drunk at a bar. You didn't want to drive drunk. Good choice. You got a taxi at the service that was supposed to drive you home. You did nothing wrong. So challenge those statements of self-blame when people feel like, oh, I should have known the unknowable, right? And if they seek medical attention, offer to accommodate them. If they want to go talk to HR, if they want to talk to an officer, offer to be there for them. The listen, validate, refer is a really easy way to remember this. Listen, validate, refer. Listen to them, say that you're here for them, validate that they have a right to be upset or sad or that they have a right to feel confused. Like, that's fine. And then refer to resources. So what does support sound like? It sounds like a lot of these words, right? I believe you. It's not your fault. You're not alone. I'm sorry that this happened to you. I'm here to listen. I'm here to help. Sometimes we just want the language to know what to say, right? We just want to know what we should say. So if you experience sexual harassment in this sense, you're not alone, one. I think that the Me Too movement has really shown that we are not alone in sexual harassment and sexual assault. And that, reaching out to a specialized advocate who knows particularly about sexual harassment. talking to folks in the community that you trust, reviewing your company, your community, or your organization's protocols and policies so that you're well-versed in the sense that you know your rights, right? Like that's what you want to know. You want to know your rights. You want to document everything. It's really difficult at times to think back 6 months or a year after things have been going on for so long to remember everything. So documenting everything helps you just not have to remember everything for yourself. And if it's safe to do so, consider approaching the person who you feel is harassing you. If it's safe to do so, consider reporting it. Organize. Organize is also another option for folks. If you already know other folks who have been experiencing the same similar harassment, going to HR together, showing that unity, showing that solidarity, that this isn't a one-off situation, that this is known by several people. And of course, always please take care of yourself if you're experiencing sexual harassment. As far as leadership goes, for leadership, I really think that there's ways that folks can really be more progressive and innovative about this. And I think that the tech industry, having a space where they are the forefront of so many things, not just domestically, but globally, is a really wonderful thing for us to be the leaders in innovation regarding how we handle sexual harassment. Adopting a clear stance, whether that's in a social online community that you have, or whether that's in a formal organization, have a clear stance. Make it very clear on all your platforms. Share it with everyone. Everyone should know what your stance is on it, what is okay and what's not okay. Take all your complaints seriously. Immediately support the victim. Train and teach community members at least twice a year about sexual harassment, what it is, what they can do about it, where they should go. I was shocked when I was talking with a group of employees and they're like, honestly, I don't even know who I would speak to if a client that I had sexually harassed me. I wouldn't know who to go to. Do I go to my supervisor? Do I go to HR? Do I go, to an advocacy group? Do I go to, who do I go to? And so the fact that there is a lack of clarity for some groups about who they actually need to talk to is a concern. And monitoring, as a leader, please monitor your community. Look for signs of sexual harassment. Take a really invested interest in addressing this. Inclusive hiring and recruiting practices, remember how I talked about that imbalance of power and that all things are kind of built upon that existing? Diversity and inclusion helps rebalance that power. And of course, consulting with experts for additional programming. So supporting a friend that's accused, that one, I think it tends to be more tricky, right? It feels more complicated. And I want to be the first to say, you are allowed to have complicated feelings about your complicated friends. You are allowed to do that. You're allowed to have complicated feelings about people who you love and people who you care about. But in this situation, to support a friend who's accused, go to your friend and ask them what happened. Just be like, hey, here's what I've heard. Here's what I've read. Here's what's going around. What's going on? Did that happen? Don't defend them blindly. I had a person in one of our communities that I previously worked at, huge community blow up regarding sexual assault. And a person accused his friend, and he immediately was like, he would never do that. He would never do such a thing. He's the kindest person on the planet. And got very vocal and very public about his defense of his friend. And later went to his friend and was like, can you believe this? Like, oh, and the friend, in the privacy of them together, the friend was like, no, man, I did that. I did that. And he just crumbled. And he's like, I defended you. And he goes, and then of course the person's like, I feel even worse about what I did, but now I feel even worse that you defended me and I didn't tell you. And so don't defend blindly. Go to your friend first. Don't be a rape or harassment apologist, because the problematic behavior, it doesn't matter how wonderful we all are. If we have problematic behavior, we need to hold ourselves accountable for it. It's not your role to be a detective. Some people really want to do that. They're like, well, I'm going to find out from this person, what's going on here, what's going on here. Don't do that. Please, please, please don't do that. Just be there to listen. You're there to support your friend. You're not there to be Scooby-Doo. Don't Scooby-Doo this. And of course, violence and retaliation is not going to help your friend. It's not going to, if you get online and want to harass someone or try to be disparaging of the survivor who's making the accusation, it can only end badly. That's never going to go over well. And also that really hinders, if there's a process going on, that can really negatively impact that. So please, please, please don't do that. Another thing is to hold your friend accountable for the negative behaviors that they did. Don't let them make excuses. Don't make excuses for them to other people, and don't let them make excuses for themselves. You can support them without making a judgment about whether or not they did that. You can say, hey, I get that you're going through some stuff right now, that this all feels really heavy. Do you want to just hang out and watch a movie and eat a pizza? That's fine. You didn't make a single judgment about whether or not they did what they did. You can just be there to support and spend time with them. And of course, supporting them in ways that helps them offer restitution, that helps them find ways to seriously make efforts to not repeat the problematic behavior again. And also educating yourself. I find that, particularly when we even talk about bystander intervention, it's like, oh, always help your friends, right? If you see your friends acting out, you go over there and say, hey, you got to cut that out. And you kind of help block your friends from making poor choices. At the same time, we're all part of this, right? The entire pyramid that I showed earlier, we've all been fed that. We all have times, men, women, doesn't matter. We've all been fed things in our lives that we have said to other people that haven't been accurate. And as we've grown and learned to do better, we need to be better. When we know better, let's do better, okay? So, of course, making sure that we unpack that within ourselves, that we're making sure that we're modeling authentic, positive behaviors, and also referring our friends to resources. If they're hitting a point, that really wonderful point, where there's coming to this awareness of, wow, I really have some problems, or I really have a mindset that is really negatively impacting people. I'm hurting people. And so they want to go talk to someone. Please encourage that. Please encourage that they talk to someone. Because as you're not a therapist, you're not a counselor, you have your own limitations. And so you help them get the best help that they can with people who are specialized to do it. And of course, if you're the support person supporting a friend who's been sexually assaulted or supporting someone who's been accused, please remember to take care of yourself as that support person. Be mindful. You can also benefit from seeing a counselor or having a confidential person that you can talk to. Have extra time for the activities that you enjoy. And when we talk about boundaries, that you all have needs, right? We all got needs. We all have our boundaries. We know that if you are helping your friend, maybe during your lunch break at work, you can be firm that, hey, I can maybe respond to a few texts at home, but when I'm home, I'm there with my spouse and my family. I want to spend time with them. Or if it's about, hey, I can, particularly I think for female survivors who are being supported by other femmes, that maybe they both mutually have experienced a lot of sexual violence. And so when you have a friend who's maybe really processing the trauma that's occurred to them, that can be re-triggering for you. And so maybe a boundary is, I'm happy to sit with you and we can take your mind off things, or I can hug you when you're crying, but I don't feel like I'm not the person who can talk to you when you want to talk about what occurred, because it's hard for me. So please feel free to be firm about your boundaries. And also ask if there's other people that you can share the support for them with. Are there other folks in their lives who also know what's going on, who are willing to share those supports? Don't have you be the only one, right? So when we talk about this in the concept of a community, about your institution, your organizations, the idea of a community versus a group, that in a community, you share a mutual concern for each other's welfare. That's what a community is. You actually, for lack of a better way to put it, you give a shit about each other, right? You're not just here in the same space. You care about one another. As with a group, I love what Robert Putnam said. He's like, they root for the same team and they share some of the same interests, but they are unaware of each other's existence. Their ties, in short, are common symbols, common leaders, and perhaps common ideals, but not to one another. So when we talk about this, and I know that we are going to be pretty short on time, but there's another deep dive discussion tomorrow at 11 o'clock that if folks have more questions, I would love for you to show up for this. But the components of a strong community, your shared values, your membership identity, your moral prescriptions, and your insider understandings, and how all these things lead to the resilient community, which I want to get to community accountability. So we have our individual rights versus our community rights, right? My rights end where your safety begins. And that's where we see this community accountability. Things to consider when addressing violations in a community are the history of the individual. How have they done this multiple times? Is this the first time? The severity, was this low level? Was this high level? The response from the individual when you approach them, do they say, I'm so sorry? Or do they say, no, what? You're crazy. Do they try to gaslight? And then the wishes of the individual or the individuals who experience that negative behavior, and then also equity. if you're dealing with multiple issues about this, how are we viewing this? Are we setting a criteria for equity? And of course, the individual accountability versus the community accountability. There's individual violence that occurs, and then there's systemic violence that has allowed individual violence to occur. So when we talk about that, I hope that folks can see this slide. If not, once again, you have access to this tomorrow. So it talks about, if I can find this one correctly, the bottom one, commit to ongoing development of all members, community, and the community itself to transform the political conditions that reinforce oppression in the workplace. So it's one of those things where is the environment already set up for this to occur? Is it only a matter of time? And for a lot of spaces, it is. They're like, we never had written down guidelines about this. We never had a code of conduct about this. And so they're like, okay, we need to tighten that up. We need to be more firm. We need to be more clear. And so the questions I want you all to think about when you're in your communities is, what are the core values that attract your members and keep your members? Do people show up because they're like, man, every year I know that basically they're bankrolling, my bachelor party in Vegas? Yes. Like, is that why people keep coming to certain things? What is your membership identity? Do people identify as folks who feel like they're a group, they feel like they're a community? How are they encouraged to be members? Who do you go to find members? Where do you get your members from? What communities are they coming from? Whom do you protect? Where does the money go? Always follow the money. Always follow the money. And what is intolerable? Is it clear in your communities what's tolerated and what's not tolerated? How is it communicated to members? What's tolerated and not tolerated? And what do your members share? And who do they share it with? Who do they respect, and how do they show respect to one another? And I know that had we had a little bit more time, we would have gone more deep into membership identity, but it's important for you to identify who is the member that you actually want in your community. And is that the member are those the members that you're getting? And then also, are those the members who are perpetrating this violence in your communities? So please be thoughtful when you are thinking about your strategic plan in your community building. And so also, do members know what to do when an incident occurs? Or is it an understood process that you could ask anyone in the community and everyone would be like, oh yeah, you go see so-and-so? Does everyone already know intrinsically what would happen and who they would go to? And what education or resources does your community need to increase prevention? Of course, we want to do prevention, education, and accountability. Those are the three things that folks really need to focus on: prevention, education, and accountability. And what types of individual and community accountability work at your community, and on what levels? So there's some accountability that's going to work for lower level things, mid-level issues, and then high level issues. You may have a spectrum of accountability, which frankly, I would recommend. So as we go about this, I really hope that folks can be thoughtful. And this, of course, is my last slide, so folks can have some questions if they would like to, but we can also go into the other room as well, since I know it is the end of the day, and we all want naps and food and booze. I do. So, of course, tomorrow, there's going to be an hour-long, a 50-minute discussion regarding this that we can go in a little bit deeper. We can talk more about the different justice approaches that people have had about this, whether that's in a social community or whether that's in an institution. But just for folks to realize that this is, once again, sexual violence is not discriminatory. It is unfortunately very much impacting everyone, okay? So thank you so much for really considering this issue. Thank you so much for coming. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to talk to me afterwards. I think we're basically out of time. I have 1 minute, then I shall grandstand. Okay. I would just like to say, please, please, please think thoughtfully about your community. Number one, always center the survivor in the discussions. Always, always. They're the one that no matter what someone who's been accused is experiencing, they're feeling something the worst, okay? So please, please, please center the survivor. Come up with a concrete thing that people can read, that people can understand. Make it known, make it clear, make it very open. The more open you make this topic, the much easier it is for male survivors to come forward, and male survivors rarely ever come forward. And we know that that happens a lot. It is not rare in the male community. We know this happens a lot in LGBTQ communities, trans communities. Everyone is affected by this. So please be as open about it as you can, be bold. This is a time for boldness, so please. But thank you so much for coming. I appreciate all your time.